Don't you just hate playing pocket jacks? Isn't it a really awkward hand to play? Aren't you in lots of situations where you think, what do I do here? Do I get my hand all in? Do I re-raise? Do I four bet? Isn't it just the worst playing pocket jacks? The answer is no. Pocket jacks are a really good hand and they're worth a lot of EV, and you should be really happy when you get dealt them. And I'm hopefully here to help you transition into that line of thought if you're someone that gets dealt jacks and thinks, oh no, here we go again, this is going to be a difficult hand to play, and you end up doing something stupid or something you wouldn't normally do because you just want to get the hand in as quick as possible, or you want to play too passively, or whatever it is. I'm here to talk about as many situations as possible we can get into with pocket jacks and how to maximize the expected value of our hand. I'm going to talk about when we face a raise, when we face a re-raise, getting it all in pre-flop, when we're playing shorter stacked. It's a very concise summary of lots of situations we can be in with pocket jacks. Here is GTO Wizard. This is a solver that's going to give us loads of pre-flop ranges. It doesn't mean this is how we should play, but this is always the starting point. I'm looking here at 100 big blinds, multiple table tournament poker. So this is in a tournament. It means there's antes. It means there's no ICM implications. It's early stages of a tournament. I'm going to look at 100 big blinds deep, and we're going to say that it's an 8-handed table. Under the gun has opened. What do we want to do next to act with pocket jacks? Well, the answer here in solver world is we want to call or raise. We actually don't have a preference. So if you look at this number here, we're making the same amount of EV if we call or if we raise. So it means it's completely up to us. In theory, we should do both sometimes, which means there isn't a wrong answer. And based on who we're playing against, how the table's operating, how we think they're going to respond, what we think their ranges are, that's how we're going to determine the best choice in game. Or if we can't make the correct choice in game, we're just going to effectively randomize. We're just going to say, oh, I feel like call this time, or I feel like raise this time, without actually having a strong reason of why. And if you're playing against people that you think are better than you, that's usually the thing you want to do. If you're playing against people that you have ways to exploit, like you know they're too tight, you know they're too aggressive, you don't want to do both things half the time and randomize. You want to actually use your intuition and think, I think this guy's raising too many hands and he's calling too many hands against a re-raise, so I'm always going to re-raise with jacks here. Or I think this guy's playing really tight, so I'm going to call with my jacks and play more cautiously. But you shouldn't necessarily look at this and think, this is exactly how I should play against anyone, because this solved range is playing against the solved range, and we never play against people that play like perfect machines. That's the first most important point. If you're facing a raise here, under the gun +1 with jacks, you can do either. So then let's look at all the other positions. If you're next to act, what can you do? Well, it's the same story. You're going to make the same amount of EV if you call or if you raise. If you keep looking at this number here, all the suits obviously aren't going to make any difference pre-flop. Let's go to the cutoff. Here instead, we're in the cutoff facing under the gun open, and again, it's the same story. What about if we're on the button? Again, it's the same story. So 100 big blinds deep, if you're facing an early position raise with pocket jacks, you can do what you want. You can just decide based on in-game. You can't make a mistake by calling, and you can't make a mistake by re-raising in this situation. Does it change if we're out of position in the small blind? Well, it looks like we want to raise a little bit more often, and it makes a really tiny amount more EV. So that should give us an indication of, oh, when we're out of position, we do want to re-raise more. That might be a product of the fact that if we call, the big blind gets a really good price and he just gets to come in with loads of hands. We don't really want to be there, but everyone's in position against us, so winning pre-flop's really good. And obviously raising is still always going to be good because he's going to call with worse hands. Let's look at if we re-raise on the button here. But this is how they're supposed to respond in solver world. They're supposed to re-raise with ace-king suited, aces, mostly with kings, and then everything else doesn't have a strong preference. The way that the undergun player is going to respond with calls is to call with all of these worse hands. So all of these suited aces, all of these suited Broadway hands, some of these suited connectors. Maybe they're going to call too much with some of these, or they're going to raise too much in the first place and then call too much. They're going to call with mostly all of the pairs they've got, and obviously we dominate every pair they've got. Generally speaking, jacks is a really nice hand to free bet for value, and if they're going to call with king 9 suited, with king 8 suited, with queen 9 suited, with pocket 5s every time, with king queen or ace jack offsuit, with ace 10 offsuit, as soon as they start calling with these hands, well, we just want to free bet for value every time because we're just making that much more value. And maybe on the other end of the spectrum, they're not 4-bet bluffing enough with ace 10 suited, with ace 5 suited, ace 4 suited. So let's get into more of a situation where jacks becomes a much stronger hand. Let's say instead that it falls to the button and they go for the open raise, and we're in the small blind with pocket jacks. Well, you're going to see suddenly now, jacks doesn't want to call anymore. Jacks always wants to re-raise now. Just in principle, the more hands that they open, the more we can re-raise in a linear fashion for value, and jacks is a hand that gets a lot of value from a lot of hands and is ahead of a lot of hands. So let's move on to the next situation. Let's say instead you are the player that has opened. So you've opened under the gun with pocket jacks and you face a re-raise. What should you do? Should you go for the 4-bet? Should you go for the call? Should you try and get it all in pre? For first, let's look at the most extreme situation. So this is, you've opened under the gun, the next player to act is re-raised, under the gun +1, and it folds back to you in under the gun with your pocket jacks. So here again, we can see a similar story to facing the open, and it's that we are indifferent between taking the more aggressive action and taking the more passive action. And this is the most important point with pretty much all of how you approach poker in situations. It's to see that this is what the solver does. The solver doesn't really care. It can call, it can raise, it's going to do both sometimes. But in practice, we can use our intuition in game to think, how is my opponent acting in the first place, and how are they going to respond when I do X or when I do Y? How do I maximize my EV based on that? Let's take the aggressive option with jacks and see what our opponent is supposed to do. So then we have a good idea of what we can compare to. If we're here under the gun and we make the 4-bet to 21 big blinds, which we should do sometimes in Solver World, and it folds back to under the gun +1, let's see how he's supposed to respond. He's supposed to call with ace-4 and ace-5 suited, so if your opponent's never re-raising with ace-4 and ace-5 suited, you're already losing potentially a little bit of EV here. He's supposed to fold with loads of these suited Broadway hands, with some of these like ace-8 and ace-9 suited hands. He's supposed to call with some of these suited aces hands. He's supposed to call with all these pairs, but he's supposed to have also re-raised them in the first place. Is your opponent ever free betting with 6-5 suited here, with pocket 6s, with pocket 7s? Does he have 10-9 suited in his range? Does he have ace-queen off in his range? Well, if he doesn't have some of these hands in his range, he's not going to get to this situation with them. So it also changes the way we should impose our strategy on the situation. Remember, solvers only play against solvers. So in this case, the way that this hand has been solved to determine how much EV we're making is assuming that your opponent is playing exactly like this. And we know that our opponent will never play exactly like this. So you have to use your intuition. You have to think, this guy is either free betting too much and calling my 4-bet too much, or this guy is not free betting enough and not calling the 4-bet too much, and then you should calibrate accordingly. So now let's say it's a spot where ranges are a little bit wider. You've raised in the cutoff, and this young aggressive punk on the button, you know what he's up to. You know he's seeing that you've opened wide. You know he's just going to take this spot too much. You can see it in his face. He is out of line. He is going to try and free bet here with way too many hands, and he goes for the re-raise. And it comes back to you with your pocket jacks in the cutoff, and you're thinking, I know I'm ahead of this kid. I know that he's just doing it too wide. He's going absolutely crazy. My jacks are good here. What should I do? Do you know what it means for him to be free betting too wide? Do you think that has he shown up with hands that are actually credible based on the solved range? Is he doing it too much? And if he is overdoing it, does that mean we just get to 4-bet every time, or should we still be calling sometimes? Again, this is a spot where pocket jacks is already indifferent. Even though it's cutoff versus button, late position versus late position, pocket jacks doesn't really have a strong preference in Solver World. Let's see how he is supposed to continue if we do 4-bet. If we go for the 4-bet here to 21 big blinds, and it gets back to him, well, look at the hands he's supposed to have here. He's supposed to have Jack 7 suited. He's supposed to have 10-7 suited. He's supposed to have Queen 5 suited, King 4 suited, King 3 suited. Not every time for any of these hands, but he's supposed to have them all sometimes. Ace 8 offsuit, Ace 9 offsuit, Ace 5 suited, most people might find, but Ace 2 suited, Ace 7 suited, Queen 8 suited. There's so many people you'll play against that will never have 8-6 suited here, never have 9-7 suited, never have 10-8 suited. And you might think they're aggressive because you've seen them free bet light, but realistically, to get to this much of a free betting range is pretty rare. There are obviously going to be some select opponents that will still do it more than this. You might be surprised how easy it is to think someone is overdoing it when in fact they're still not overdoing it. Even if they free bet this spot, you've seen them turn up with Queen 9 suited, King 9 suited, Ace 7 suited, all this stuff, and you think they're taking these spots. It still doesn't mean they're doing it out of line. And against this range, jacks doesn't 4-bet every time. It is completely down to us. If we think that they're going to call too much, then we can 4-bet for value. But remember, you are making the pot bigger. You might be in some awkward situations. You might have to play out of position in a big 4-bet part and be in the hand when an overcard comes. You might be against someone that's aggressive, that's going to bluff you post-flop so much that you're going to lose some of the EV you gain by 4-betting pre-flop. It all is worked into the equation. So we've looked at facing a raise. Pocket jacks kind of does what it wants. We looked at facing a re-raise. Again, pocket jacks kind of does what it wants. You don't have to believe you're making a mistake unless you don't know why you're doing what you're doing. You have to just make the determination in game. Either I think my opponent's doing this too much, I think he's doing this not enough, or I don't know what he's doing. And if you don't know what he's doing, again, you can't make a mistake. There is nothing you can do hypothetically that is so wrong with pocket jacks in these situations. But what about getting it all in pre-flop? If we were the button player that re-raised against the cutoff, so it was 2.3 big blinds, 8 big blinds, and then the cutoff raised to 21 big blinds, and we're now 100 big blinds deep on the button, well, you can go all in here with pocket jacks, or you can call. Again, similar story. It seems to make the same amount of EV if you go all in or if you call. But again, this is Solver World. And what do we know about Solver World? Well, what is the cutoff supposed to have 4-bet to make it so we can go all in here with pocket jacks? Now look at this 4-betting range. there's some Jack 9 suited, there's some King 9 suited, there's loads of suited ace-X, there's some pairs, there's some 10-8 suited, ace-Jack offsuit, King-Queen offsuit. There's a whole plethora of hands here which a lot of people are absolutely never going to have. It's very fair to say that a lot of opponents here, they will show up with queens, kings, aces, ace-king every time. And then they will sometimes have pocket jacks, they will sometimes have pocket tens, they will sometimes have ace-queen, and then they will infrequently have some bluffs, which might be some suited aces, it might be some suited king, it might be some of this stuff, but it will be so much less frequently than all of these hands that we really need to know if we're gonna decide to get 100 big blinds in here, that they are capable of bluffing, because we need folds. If we're against a range that is just queens plus ace king, is it really smart to play for 100 big blinds again in this spot? Do we actually want to do that? Even if it makes a small amount of EV, is it going to make as much EV as calling and playing post flop? This is going to change a lot if we're not as deep. So if we're 40 big blinds deep, it's a completely different story, where if we raise in the cutoff 2.3 big blinds, button re-raises us 6.9 big blinds, it folds back to us with our 40 big blinds, and yeah, jacks is just a slam dunk, let's go with it. It still doesn't mean that it's always a slam dunk go with it based on your opponent, but at least in this sense, we know it's something that a solver's always doing. A solver's not deciding between either based on people playing wider ranges than we're used to. A solver is just getting it in here because it makes so much more money to go all in. We go all in for 40 big blinds. How is the button supposed to respond? Well, one, they're supposed to have all of these folds with hands that it's good to make us fold out of position. So his suited kings and his suited queens, well, they've got a decent amount of equity against us. So when we call, they might bluff us post flop, or they might hit top pair and then go ahead of us. Some suited aces. So folding out all of these hands is where a lot of the EV comes from, denying his equity. Folding out some of these offsuit Broadway hands, denying his equity. But more importantly, in this situation, we get called by ace jack, we get called by ace queen, we get called by pocket tens, and as well, we get called by pocket sevens. And I don't know how often you actually see this in practice, when someone free bets the button versus the cutoff and you go all in for 40 big blinds, but they're just going to call off with pocket sevens. Just remember that this is a print, but it's also a print because you're folding out all of this bluff equity that might not be true, and you're getting called by a lot more worse hands, which might not be true. Do all of this with caution. The most important thing when making a decision in game is to always use your intuition. You're at the table with these people, you've seen the way these people play, you've seen the hands they get to showdown, you know intuitively which direction they're in. Are they a little bit bluffy? Are they very bluffy? Are they a complete nit? And these factors of how your opponents play is so much more important for making our decision, because like we just looked at, when we're facing a raise or facing a re-raise, or even when it comes to getting it in most situations, pocket jacks in solver world, where generally people don't play as aggressively as solvers, it becomes a mixed strategy because they make a similar amount of EV. Are you really going to make more EV taking the aggressive option in practice? So we looked at facing a raise, we looked at facing a re-raise, we looked at some spots to get it in pre. Obviously, the shorter stacked you are, the more jacks goes up in value. Their bluffing range should be wider, denying the equity is more important, and more importantly, they should get it in with a wider range. So instead of sometimes get a free bet calling with nines there, they should do it every time if you're only 30 big blinds deep. But again, it's based on your opponent. Is your opponent going to free bet call with pocket eights? Are they going to free bet call with pocket nines? Are they going to free bet call with ace queen? You have to think about how they're going to respond, and based on how you've seen them play, you're going to have a very good idea of what that means. That's all for this video. I hope that was quite educational on how to play pocket jacks. I hope if you are completely uncomfortable, you feel a little bit more comfortable at least. I know there isn't a determined this is how you play it, but obviously situations can be so nuanced and different. Just think about your opponent's range, think about your range, think about the situation, and I'm sure that you will come to the best decision in game. And if you get to a decision where you're not sure, well, this is a point for you to go and study. This is a leak in your game, and there is a way for you to go and address it right now. There's loads of free software, there's loads of free educational tools, there's people you can get coaching from. There's no point just getting into the next situation with pocket jacks or whatever the situation is and thinking, I still don't know how to play it. As soon as you've spotted a situation where you're a little bit lost, this is something that you need to address, and this is how you improve. Like, comment, subscribe, all the good stuff. Thanks for watching, and I will see you on the next video.